I'm going to start talking. Yes. See how that works? All right, it's time to go ahead and start class this morning and get Karen to settle down. Well, Henry's over there too, so it's not just you. It is Henry, yeah.
I'm unruly.
Yes. Okay. Well, I told you last week that I would not be here this week, but here I am. Stuff happens. We were going to have John Phillips from the Student Center come. He's not doing his presentation this week. He's going to do it in 2 weeks. So we'll have youth rally next week. Then we'll hear from the Student Center from Laramie, and then I'll be back. So here we are. So in that, and it's all Chris's fault. So if you have any questions, ask Chris what's going on. Now, we wanted the answer to the question why we have all this up here. So he's hopefully going to give it. Mike did not provide the answer for us last week, even though he kind of hinted that he might know something, but he doesn't. Didn't know anything about that. He knows a lot of stuff. So anyway, we aren't leaving Joseph kind of hanging. We're going to just dive right back in and pick up with the rest of the story. And then we'll leave him for a bit, and we'll come back in 3 weeks. So go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 41. If you remember last week, which is only a week ago, so we all remember, we kind of left Joseph with the proposal to Pharaoh based on God's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams. That's verses 33 through 36 of chapter 41. I'll go ahead and read that. Joseph saying, "And now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land. Let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. And let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish during the famine." So Joseph, who was the only person who was able to discern the dreams or interpret with God's assistance, in which God, he gave all credit to God and told Pharaoh that, this is determined by God. Pharaoh, his wise men, his magicians, they were not able to give any answers. Joseph was. So who else would Pharaoh appoint? And this is really Joseph's, the whole purpose, and we see God's plan throughout the life of Joseph and all that has occurred. We see God's providence, God's plan, and God putting in place exactly who he wanted, when he wanted, and where he wanted him to be, and to enact the plan that he had set forth. Joseph gives all credit to God, and Joseph here is now put in charge. So let's go ahead and read 37 through 45 and see what occurs. Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, Can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, Since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand, put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of fine linen, put the gold necklace around his neck, and he had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, Bow the knee, and he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Okay, who else? Pharaoh sees that he has has a divine spirit, that God is with him, and appoints him over everything. Really, I mean, if you look at it, he's basically the ruler of Egypt. Pharaoh is just, he's given pretty much all of his authority to Joseph. Puts on fine clothes, signet ring, gold necklace, gives him the second chariot. I don't know if that's like Air Force or Air Force 2 or how that worked back then. So you have the second chariot, but I'm sure it was pretty fancy. But all then were also ordered to bow to him. Kind of a long way for Joseph. I mean, he gives him fine clothes. I mean, weren't the clothes that he changed when he came out of the dungeon? Remember, he changed his clothes to come there. Should have been pretty nice stuff, right? I don't know, to go in front of Pharaoh. But I mean, this is the finest. I mean, if you got to imagine, it's the finest of clothes, the finest of appointments for him. I mean, he's got everything, or accoutrements. But here, and he's also given a new name, Zaphenath-Paneah, which means God speaks, he lives, is the interpretation for that. And he's given Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Now, one thing I'm not extremely familiar with was, that's one thing I never studied, were all the different gods and like of Egypt or Rome, Greeks, all of those things. So I had to did a little bit of research as far as who the priests of On were. And your Bible may say Heliopolis. That's that On, and in that, and also it's known as Ain Shemesh. But it's the first Egyptian capital during the pre-dynastic period, and On was where the Egyptians believed that creation took place, and it was the home of their first and mightiest god, Adam. And Adam was the source of all their other gods. So this was their god of creation, their first god, and On was the place where their first city and the place where they believed all creation went forth from. I do think it's interesting, in all that, they had a ton of different gods, and we've heard of all of them, but it seems like, and this is true of all the different peoples, they all had a supreme god or a superior god. It wasn't, necessarily the right god, but, they all, if you think of all man came from the same place, so they all had a familiarity that some of them just, seemed to, they, as man does, distort it and twist things. But again, this was their preeminent, and so it makes sense that Pharaoh is like, hey, I see that God is with you. I'm going to give you as wife the daughter of one of the priests of our supreme God. And these On priests, they were known for a lot of their skills. They had skills in, they were inventors. They invented the calendars, the same calendars that we use today. They were great mathematicians, astronomers, and that's who these priests. In fact, the people that Pharaoh first called on to probably help him interpret these dreams probably came from these On priests, this On priesthood. They brought them in when they had these difficult questions to ask. I mean, who better to ask than, advice from or get answers from than these priests of their mighty God, who was not able to help them in any way. These priests were not able to interpret. But I think Pharaoh was in giving Asenath to Joseph. I think it showed how much he was elevating him, how much he believed in him, and showing, hey, here's kind of a daughter of a priest of our great God as well, and you have this divine spark in you, and we recognize that. I think it's amazing that Pharaoh and this Pharaoh, we see other, we see a Pharaoh down the line, and his response to being called out and shown the one true God. This Pharaoh had a whole different approach when he's confronted with the greatness and the mightiness of God. He recognizes it and then elevates Joseph up. We know what happened. We will know what happens here in the next book down the line, a few hundred years with that Pharaoh. But that's not part of the class today. So Pharaoh gives him this wife, elevates him up to this preeminent place, and tells him he has the authority to do everything that he wants to do or needs to do based on the interpretation of the dreams that they had. One other note, just completely side note, this On, which was their capital, it was believed to have been razed, completely destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar sometime around 591 BC, 567 BC. So it was completely destroyed, but that's just another side note. And we remember Nebuchadnezzar, that's several more chapters in the future, with another person that was able to, or the only other one that was able to interpret dreams, which we talked about last week, that being Daniel. So I know there's just links and ties here everywhere. So what does Joseph do? He now has all this authority, he has all this power. What is the outcome of that? Let's go ahead and read verses 46 through 49 of chapter 41. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, went through all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the seas, till he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. So Joseph does what, or has done what he had told Pharaoh needed to be done. That being completely, he takes over all of this great abundance, all this food. Let's start gathering and storing in each and every city. Now I wanted to, another little sidebar. Is there any proof or information that would show that something like this occurred from history? Mike would say yes. Based on the one book, and that does kind of point to exactly when. But I wanted to look at the archaeological record. It's kind of just an interesting side note. I found it interesting. Hopefully you do too. In 2008, there was a study done, or a expedition, just kind of an explanation of that expedition was written up, and this is from the University of Chicago, and it was in Tel Edfu where this expedition went, and Tel Edfu is in the southern part of Egypt. And they unearthed a large administration building and silos that provide fresh clues about the emergence of urban life. And the discovery provides new information about a little understood aspect of ancient Egypt, the development of cities in a culture that is largely famous for its monumental architecture. The archaeological work at Tel Edfu was initiated with the permission of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, headed by Zahi Hawass under the direction of Nadine Moeller, assistant professor at the Oriental Institute, University of Chicago. Work late last year revealed details of 7 silos, the largest grain bins found in ancient Egypt, as well as an older columned hall that was an administration center. Long fascinated with temples and monuments such as pyramids, scholars have traditionally spent little time exploring the residential communities of ancient Egypt. Due to intense farming and heavy settlement over the years, much of the record of urban civilization has been lost. So little archaeological evidence remains that some scholars believe Egypt did not have a highly developed urban culture, giving Mesopotamia the distinction of teaching people how to live in cities. The traditional view of ancient Egypt has been biased by the fact that most excavation work so far has focused on temples and tombs. The mounds which comprise the remains of Egyptian cities were either ignored, buried under modern towns, or else destroyed by modern agricultural activities. Edfu is one of the very few remaining city mounds that are accessible for scientific study, said Gil Stein, director of the Oriental Institute. The work at Edfu is important and innovative in that it finally allows us to examine ancient Egypt as an urban society whose cities and towns house bureaucrats, craft specialists, priests, and farmers. Nadine Moeller's discovery of silos and local administrative buildings shows us how these cities actually function as places where the agricultural wealth of the Nile Valley was mobilized for the state. Grain as currency provided the sinews of power for the pharaoh, he added. Okay, so they have discovered, that's next part. The administrative buildings and silos were at the heart of the ancient community. Because grain was a form of currency, the silos functioned as a bank and a food source. The silo size indicates the community was apparently a prosperous urban center. The grain bins are in a large silo courtyard and consist of at least 7 round mud brick silos with a diameter between 5.5 and 6.5 meters. They are the largest examples discovered within a town center. Okay. I'm glad that we've kind of got to the bottom of this. It took till 2007, the end of 2007, to figure it out. But according to this, back in ancient Egypt, they had cities, and they built silos in the cities, and then had administrative centers that were close to the silos, and then they distributed the grain from those silos that they had stored up over a period of time. And our kids who have been in Bible class for a long time and have gone through Genesis, they read about that in Genesis 41 from 46 through 49. This is exactly what Joseph did. So I find it's just interesting that our archaeologists finally found out that what was written here actually happened. I don't know. I found it interesting. I just looked up kind of how the structure, what the bins were, and this was the first. I mean, everybody they go to the pyramids, they go to the tombs, they go to the different temples, and that's what they would dig up and look at. But when you go to an actual city and it talks about here, and again, this was thousands of years ago when this was written. They had the cities, and then they built the silos in the cities, and we have proof now that what the Bible says is accurate. So just wanted you guys to rest assured that what is said here is actually what had happened. But I found it interesting, and it's not just one place, but it's the cities scattered throughout Egypt, and that's basically what Joseph was doing for that whole 7 years. And it talks about gathering up 20% of everything, during that time of abundance. So they were, using what they had, but they were also, building these giant storage facilities and all throughout the land, and putting, setting the administrators there in the cities to then distribute out from the abundance over the 7 years of famine which were about to occur. Now, coming forth from that, let's go ahead and read the rest of the chapter here, chapter 41. Now, before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bore to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And he named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said. Then there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, you shall do. And when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. And the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. Okay, God's plan set in motion, and now we see it being fulfilled. First off, Joseph has 2 sons. The first is Manasseh, and making to forget is what Manasseh means. And he says, just forget all his troubles that he's had, and also forget his father's household, because now he's in this land. He probably doesn't think he'll ever see his family again. And the second is Ephraim, fruitfulness, because God, and again he gives credit to God, has made him fruitful in the land of his affliction. So even though he's second in command, I find it interesting that he mentions that he's fruitful in the land of his affliction. So even though, he's been, at this point, he's been in Egypt probably about as long, well, a little more than he was in his family. He was 17 when he was enslaved, 30 when the 7 years of plenty started, and this is during that period of plenty, and here he'll be 40 when he finally sees his family again. So 23 years without seeing his family, but this is the land of his affliction, even though he's raised up. Any thoughts on that? What do you guys think about Joseph's state of mind and how he's handling things up to this point? Marshall?
I started thinking maybe like his connections with his wife. I've always read this and thought, man, what a great job. Save some aside and you'll be next step. Be successful, they have to get all the way through that time. I wonder if they know how long it's going to knows how long. I think his job was probably intense as far as how much they give out. Maybe those mathematicians calculate. But probably a job. Be successful to keep that title and good favor with Pharaoh. Couldn't just make it 2 years through the famine. He had to.
Yeah, it's a preparation for 7 years. I like how your mind is thinking. Probably the engineer thing, but if you think about it, yeah, I think he has this connection with the daughter of a priest of On. So yeah, he's using all the mathematicians. They have to build the right number of silos in each of these places, gather it up, and they have to do this pretty quickly because the years of plenty have started immediately. So getting that whole construction project going in each of those cities, and he's going around, like you say, gathering enough grain, the proper amount to last through the 7 years of famine, and also having it where it doesn't spoil and things, keeping it sound. I think God's providence is working. The manpower involved in building that was incredible. They didn't have, at this point, all the Hebrew slaves that they used to build, a few hundred years later, but I'm sure they had plenty of workers and other slaves. Egypt was a great nation even back then. But yeah, the building project, the gathering process, the storage process, all of it, all their mathematicians and great minds. But Joseph obviously heading this up. And what training had he had in building and storage and everything? Again, God's working through him and with him. So just the undertaking is gigantic. Pharaoh, go ahead, just go do that. If you think about the whole process, it's an amazing thing. John, you had a comment?
Probably still clear the dreams that others find out. So,
Just one thing we see with Joseph is, he's giving credit to God, and he's realizing that God is with him and helping him throughout. Huh?
I still don't, as the big picture. I think as he occurs throughout, probably. I think a little bit earlier, as soon as Pharaoh sets him, probably not experience bad back him coat and put him in Potiphar, puts him in. Pharaoh puts him in. This is probably maybe a guy power, but recognition of God's providence. You see it when he names kids, but look at verse 49. Pours up these huge quantities of sand, so much that he's not keeping record because it was beyond. I have no doubt, like as they're talking about, like, this thing. Math, we got right. Get this thing right. So much. At some point, he goes, "Hey, you know what? It doesn't matter. I got this." He recognized.
So see, what I all this, everything gone through, great faith in the Lord, that faith. And because of his great faith, Pharaoh has tells us that what faith is. So for the not seeing, I agree with the whole God has been.
It's an amazing point that he has such tremendous faith in God, but other people can see his faith and can see God's providence and God's purpose and God's authority in Joseph's actions. I guess the question for us, do we give off that same kind of confidence and aura that people can see Christ in us and God's will and God's purpose in us? I guess something we need to be striving for as well. Just show our faith by our actions and how we live our lives and what we do, what we say. Joseph here, it's obvious that God is with him, and but it's like you mentioned, his father appoints him. He's at every place that he's at. He has they see something in him that he's raised up. He's put in a charge. He's put in authority. Where Pharaoh sees this and puts him in charge of everything. It's not just a little bit of authority where, okay, you're going to be in charge of gathering grain and here you got these guys, they'll help you out and stuff. He puts him in charge of everything, all authority, everything that is responsible for. So it's not just the part of gathering grain. I mean, he's everything. So, whatever he says, it has to be done. Obviously, God is so shining forth in him that it's noticed by Pharaoh that Pharaoh's like, okay, it's all yours. I think it's an incredible thing, and I think it's divine providence throughout this that God had a plan and a purpose. So this Pharaoh saw that and immediately puts Joseph into all authority, hoping that God is going to see them through this, because the dream troubled him so much that he was willing to give his authority over to this complete outsider. Trusted him. Yeah, Troy.
It's been mentioned, one of my thoughts about his faithfulness. It was a 14-year run. How many of us are faithful for 14 years?
Yeah.
Without a lapse somewhere along the way. Second thing, if you look on down the road, God was providing manna to the people in the wilderness. 6 days, they collected 1 day's worth. They collected extra spoil. Collected 2 days' worth. Didn't spoil. God can handle grain storage.
Good point.
Next question. People of God, when they had foreign wives, their track record of success is not real great. But Joseph has a foreign wife here. And it didn't seem to bring him down or destroy his faith.
Maybe it's just because he had just one foreign wife. I don't know any other ones. So, and that's all that were available there were foreign wives for him. So,
But it seems to be a
it
slightly
is
different tack
there's a
than
theme there.
the history of such action previously.
I think it's when you see that though, it's there's a prohibition against those particular wives, particular foreign wives. So again, God is there, and it's all God's plan throughout this. So He wanted Joseph to have a couple of sons, but it's the only way that was going to happen. So we see God's plan throughout. But yeah, and you're right though. With that, Joseph doesn't waver from his faith in God. He's got a daughter of a priest of this foreign god, but he's not. You see nothing where throughout this time he's not looking to the Egyptian gods or putting the Egyptian statues or anything in his residence. He's always throughout proclaiming God, declaring God, and giving credit to God throughout the entire narrative of Joseph. We see that God is with him, and he's, even at his lowest points, he's trusting in God. Any other comments? Oh, Mark.
Just as we're trying to draw analogies between what happened thousands of years ago and today, we can see just from reading verse 38 again, and Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? You usually don't find things unless you're looking. That just tells me that people are looking in just as they are now, today, for the Spirit of God.
Looking for truth.
We don't look in the right places, but people are still looking for God.
He brought in his priests to try to figure things out. So he was looking for some answers, but not from the true God. But when he found that one, I mean, you're right. He recognizes it. It's recognizable. It's seen. It's obvious. Truth is always
Happening
truth is
today.
truth.
It's still happening today.
Absolutely. Any other comments? Okay, let's go ahead and we'll jump into chapter 42. Get the other part of the family up to speed here. Let's go 42, 1 through 17. Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt. And Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place so that we may live and not die." Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I am afraid that harm may befall him." So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. All right, we can stop there. So, it had mentioned that the famine was throughout all the land. All the world has this famine occurring. And so it's happening in the land of Canaan. And Jacob sees, somehow he gets word that, hey, Egypt has food. Egypt has grain. And yeah, I heard the chuckle, but Jacob says to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" Can you imagine his sons, and these aren't young men. I mean, they're all, except for Benjamin, they're all older than Joseph, and they all have families and children of their own and stuff. But Jacob's like, "Why are you staring at one another?" Were they just looking around, just wondering, well, we're all hungry, and so is that what happens when there's a need? Do you just, I don't know, anybody else have that where you just sit and kind of just look around? Oh, somebody better do something. I don't know. We're awful hungry here. I find I don't know. You would think they would have a little bit of gumption or something, try to do something, but it seems like they were kind of content just to sit and stare at each other. And I don't know what they were saying or talking, or maybe it's just a nice expression. But they had heard that there's grain in Egypt, and so he says, "Go." But Benjamin is not to go with him. And we know that his favorite wife, Rachel, she only had the 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's lost, so he's not going to lose Benjamin. So he just sends the other 10 off to get help. And so this famine, again, it's everywhere, and the whole world is hearing about, hey, Egypt's the place to go. Egypt has grain. Egypt has food. Go buy some. And I don't know what they had to buy it with, but they obviously have something. So they all head to Egypt. Now, in verse 6, Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. And when Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he disguised himself to them and spoke to them harshly. And he said to them, "Where have you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." But Joseph had recognized his brothers, although they did not recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he had had about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to look at the undefended parts of our land." Then they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men, your servants, and not spies." Yet he said to them, "No, but you have come to look at the undefended parts of our land." But they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers in all, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." And Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you will be tested, by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you that he may get your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. But if not, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies. So we put them all together in prison for 3 days. Okay, the dream that he's kind of seeing the answer to that. The dream that he had way back when he was a kid, and then he went and told his brothers and his father and everyone about them bowing down. Now his 10 brothers have come. They're hungry. They've come on behalf of their father to buy food, and they're bowing down to him. And he sees them, recognizes them, and he's got his Egyptian disguise on, so they don't realize who he is. And again, how would they, would you think that your brother that you sold into slavery is now basically in charge of Egypt? It's probably not surprising that they didn't recognize him. But he did disguise himself up a little bit, put the fancy makeup under the eyes and things. However, whatever disguise, if you think of Egyptians, I guess, what he might have done. But again, they're bowing to him. They're declaring, and he's not going to let them get off as easy. He wants to see what their heart is, if they've had a change of heart, if anything is different about them. And so he lets them sit in prison for 3 days. Kind of gives them a little bit, not just going to let them buy grain and leave. Let's go ahead and read 18 through 24. Now Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined in your prison. But as for the rest of you, go, carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words may be verified, and you will not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen. Now comes the reckoning for his blood." They did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. And he turned away from them and wept. But when he returned to them and he spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Okay, so he tells them the new plan. Leave one of the sons behind. The rest of you go back, but bring the youngest to me. And so then they have this little kind of a sidebar, and they've been speaking through an interpreter this whole time. He's speaking with the Egyptians. They have an interpreter that's talking to the brothers. Joseph's not talking to them directly. He's talking through an interpreter. So they feel pretty free that they can talk amongst themselves in front of Joseph, and he's not going to understand what they're saying. And finally they give him what I think he was looking for. They give him this admission of their guilt against him, against Joseph. They say that that they are guilty concerning their brother. We saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. And even Reuben steps up. "See, I told you guys, as the oldest, I told you we should not have done this. Didn't I tell you that, that we shouldn't, that don't sin against him? Remember me? I said this." And if you remember back, he just said don't kill him, but it was because he figured if Joseph were to be dead, that all of the wrath of the father would be on that firstborn son. So, but he remembers that he was the good one back then, and so he lets them know, "Hey, I told you guys." But then he has that admission. Now comes the reckoning for his blood. So he accepts that Yeah, he was complicit also, and he's asking for that. Well, they're
Just realizing the reckoning, so that, I mean, they're going to have to do whatever Joseph.
commands for them to do, just in payment for the blood that is on their heads. Real quick, let's read 25 through 28, and then we'll be done this morning. I just didn't want to leave it without doing this little part. 25 through 28. Then Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to restore every man's money in his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus it was done for them. So they loaded their donkeys with their grain, departed from there. And as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey fodder at the lodging place, he saw his money, and behold, it was in the mouth of the sack. Then he said to his brothers, "My money has been returned. Behold, it is in even my sack." And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" All right. What has God done to them? They've got food, but they also have their money. They were called spies. Now they're thieves. And we'll pick it up in 3 weeks. So thanks for your attention. And